All right, folks, let's go ahead and get started. So welcome to the PWA demo for sprint number 28. As usual, we've got a pretty action-packed agenda, and so we're going to start things off with Mr. Kalkoban, who's going to go over some REST API updates in the dev docs, along with other things, I'm sure. He's always got lots to share. Salmi's going to go through an offline and browser fallback experience that she's been working on from a UX perspective, and then going to switch it up and give it to Jimmy. Jimmy's been working hard on the routing updates, some of the navigation improvements that you're probably starting to see already. And then last but certainly not least, Bar Green has lots to share on some search results and offline experience stories as well. And so that's the lineup for today. Any questions before we get started? All right. I'm going to hand it off to Mr. Kalkoban.
Cool. Okay. Share my screen. Can you see?
Yes.
Yes. Cool. All right. So what I'm going to present is 2.3 REST API browser improvements. To get to that, first you need to go to the main dev docs homepage and switch to the 2.3 beta section, and then head on over to the REST API reference area, and it will be under here. The REST endpoint. We changed the browser from Swagger to Redoc. As you can see, it's a more modern 3-panel setup. On the left side here, you've got all the REST endpoints. They're organized by the initial endpoint, the directory and guest card, and integration. And in the middle, you've got all the details of the REST endpoints here. You got your parameters and schemas for responses. And on the rightmost side, you have code samples and the response samples. It is broken up into 3 sections: one for guest, one for customer, and one for admin. I did that because the admin REST API endpoint, which is pretty complete, takes a while to load. We've made some improvements on getting it rendered quickly, but it does lazily load the endpoints. As you can see, it's deactivated until it loads in real time. We are looking into improvements on this, but we think it is a lot better experience than the Swagger implementation. I think that's it. Are there any questions about that?
Well, there's no question, just a comment. I think why this story is so important, we've got a lot of questions recently around API coverage for certain things, right? And so I think as a team, for those who've been following closely, we've made a conscious decision to fall back to REST where GraphQL isn't yet available. And so we wanted to kind of give this the same level as other documentations, provide you the access. And again, James and then Jeff and team have done such a nice job on this recently. We wanted to just make this note, but then also again show where this relates to the rest of the PWA documentation. So again, I think this aligns really well with some of the feedback we've got recently. And again, for those who will see the recording here, this is where it is. So
yeah, and we are making improvements and soliciting feedback from everyone, so we can iterate on it.
Cool.
Yeah, another comment on that, just real quick. This REST experience is great. I would love to get something similar up for GraphQL. I've tried to work with our DevOps team here on standing up like a server that we can expose, where we can expose schema documentation so developers can access it without having their own instance of Magento. Haven't gotten very far in that regard yet, at least with DevOps. So if anyone has ideas on how to maybe make that possible, come talk to me. I'd love to make that happen.
Cool. Yeah, we'd love to see that. Maybe we can get creative. We've certainly been creative recently, and so let's see what we can do. Cool. Very good. Thank you, Mr. Kalkoban. Let's switch gears now to Salmia. She's going to walk through some offline and browser fallback experiences.
Just want to make sure that people can hear me from here.
Can you all hear Salmia?
Yes, ma'am.
From the diaphragm.
All right, I will share my screen. I'm sorry if it sounds like I'm yelling for people in the room. All right, so we have sort of mock-ups for two scenarios here. One is that something went wrong and a page couldn't be found. And this is pretty standard for how other PWAs handle it as well. It's just a page that says, sorry, we couldn't find the page you requested, and then continue shopping would pop them onto the home page for Benya, and they could continue, because we can't presume there might be any number of points in the shopping journey that they might hit this. So the safest thing would be to take them back to home and allow them to decide where to go. The other one is when JavaScript is disabled. We discussed this on Friday, and this scenario is probably more likely to occur with a technical user that has disabled JavaScript, in which case they would probably know how to recover. But in the scenario that somebody, who isn't technical and probably isn't aware how to do it runs into this, then we sort of followed the SoundCloud model where they direct people to sort of a simple tutorial on how to do that. So it just, the hyperlink that says enable JavaScript in your browser would take them to a page with simple instructions on how to do that. So those are the two scenarios we've dealt with. I don't know if we're missing any others at this point, but feedback is welcome and suggestions as well.
Very good. I'll say I'll add a comment as people gather questions on this. And this is a fairly straightforward story, but I think it's perfect, right? And I think the other context on this one that's also as important is this also helps us, attain what a PWA is, right? And so as part of Lighthouse scores for PWA, you need to have a graceful fallback for this. And so no better graceful fallback than I think with what Soumya provided here. So I think that's great.
Yeah, and personally, I would like to see a slightly more, personable graphic on this page. So one of my team members is working on an illustration for, somebody that dropped their shopping bag, or, just something that's, for lack of a better word, cuter.
Yeah.
That we can put on this page so people are not missed when they hit this scenario as much.
I like the idea of it's closed if you don't have JavaScript enabled, like on purpose.
Yeah.
Like we don't serve
Yeah.
you we reserve the right. But yeah, I mean, this is obviously going to be sort of a basic format that we reuse in various situations where you can't do a full display, and so I like the initial concept of logo plus status image plus explanation. The swap the close sign with a hand-drawn exclamation point, that's fine with me. I mean, the important thing is you guys are in charge of the assets. You'll make the right decision. But the important thing to me is that this is a fine and reusable and clear UI. So great job.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Excellent. Let's go ahead and switch gears. And we've got Mr. Stanford, who's going to walk us through some of the latest in navigation and routing.
Okay, which have now been merged. So we merged those on Friday. So share the screen. Okay, so unfortunately this demo is not going to be as slick as it ought to be, and that's because the data on my local is not matching up, so you're not going to see actual data in the categories as I flip between them, but that will change soon. So the main change that we've made here to routing is a restructuring of the Magento router class in a way that allows you to render your own loading view or error view, either a 404 or the equivalent of a 500. When Magento route handler responds that it doesn't understand your route or that it's currently loading your route. So the new structure of the router passes route props to a React context provider, and then you can use a component here called page coming from Peregrine, which will use a route consumer to pull that context and render the Magento route handler, which is the same thing that already looks up your root component, and renders it. But this time, while it's doing that, it will render your own custom loading and error review, and then update itself accordingly once it finds your root component. And because of the way this is constructed, you can actually use this page component at any level of your app. So in Venia, page no longer has to be the top level component. It can be within some kind of container that's got your header, your footer, the drawers on the site. And so now when you have a route change, finally, the whole app's not going to unmount and remount. Only the part that you want. Yep.
Sorry, quick interruption. If you don't want to use local store, you want to demo with Venia data, since the change is merged and deployed, you can go to magento-venia.now.sh.
That'll work.
Yep.
So for our example, what we're doing now, we're pulling in the router from Peregrine. And so now we're basically rendering Apollo, Redux, the Magento router, and then our app name pending for this component, but it's not important. We've got our app shell, we've got our main, we've got our navigation, our mini cart, the mask for the page, and then this is now where the Magento router is going to render that root component that it has. And we're going to give it an error review here that is going to handle loading and 404 or 500. So now, when we navigate, the header up here is not going to redraw. It's not going to unmount and remount. And that means also that these things can keep their state even as we navigate around. And so these categories are hard-coded because there's not a GraphQL query for them. And they're hard-coded, unfortunately, to Luma data, so this is not going to work. But even without going to actual pages, even when they go to 404s, you'll be able to see what I'm talking about here. If I go to the first category, right, we're now on tops women / jackets women. When I open this menu back up, it's preserved all of its state. We're still in that category because it didn't unmount and remount. So we can go to another category, and we can go to a third category, and we can go back and forth between these, and you can see that there's no redrawing going on here. The only thing that updates is the content.
Oh, yeah.
So in association with that, there's work here on integrating the category navigation inside the navigation component. But of course, the sign in and create account flow from community is still there. That's really it. I wish that I had the other hard-coded categories so that this would look a little bit slicker, but trust me, this will make the overall experience of navigating around the app a lot better.
Hey, is the navigation currently based on, or category navigation based on GraphQL, or is it REST-based? Or neither?
You mean these here?
Yep.
This is neither. This is hard-coded. The REST endpoint, as far as I can tell, requires some kind of authentication.
That should not be the case, but
I'm totally with you. So if there's an endpoint that doesn't require auth, then I should be using it, and I don't know about it. But I mean, ideally, right, it would come from GraphQL.
Yeah, so the category endpoint in GraphQL should have enough info to build this out. So that's why I was curious.
Okay. Does it give you a nested result, or do you need to query for each of them and then build the nesting?
I think there's actually a couple different ways to do it. It should return basically the level of each category, so you can do it based on that.
Okay.
Or you should be able to query. I think it is nested also. So.
Okay, cool. Then this is due, right, this feature is ready for that kind of update, so we can add a story for that.
Fantastic.
Okay.
Cool.
That's great to know. Thank you. What were you going to say, James?
I was basically going to say that we built the navigation fairly early when there were some pretty big missing pieces in what the category tree response was. We understand that, Misha, like the nature of the category tree, and that's exactly what we need. So yeah, that's the direction we're going for sure.
Cool.
Awesome. That's good to hear. Thanks, guys.
All right. Any other questions?
Well, since you're demoing, Jimmy, you want to do one more thing?
Sure. What do you got?
That's something I tossed in. I have been working on quite a bit of behind-the-scenes stuff, including validation against the cloud, and most of that's not really demoable, and it's not appropriate for this occasion, although we can. But you notice that there are pictures on the homepage category tiles now.
I can share screen again.
If you listen closely, you'll hear 18 people writing down that URL right now.
Yeah. Well, I can explain more, as a matter of fact. So yes, there are, and this is due to there is a mistake, not in the GraphQL API as far as we know, but just a missing piece in the Venia sample data that doesn't assign an image to a category. So we've actually implemented in the code a fallback that if the image is not available in the category list result, then the category list result is already primed to pull information about the first product that appears in the category in natural sort order and just grab its image. So it doesn't require an extra request. That's the beauty of GraphQL, and you can now see that there's images, which is nice. A couple other things. Thank you very much, Jimmy. A couple of other things. The router thing is huge, and it allows us to merge in a bunch of really valuable contributions and ideas from people like Paul and your concept of custom loaders and 404s, which is now long in the tooth pull requests that we can address again, because we're really excited to have those abstractions. It's why have a data fetch error string in several root components at once? We can now proceed forward with that, and that is really exciting. So thanks again, Jimmy. I don't want to understate the value of what you contribute.
Yep.
That's it.
Well, and likewise, if we're building on this one, I know this has been a big topic in the community threads from Shane and others, and so I think this helps them tremendously with something that's going to be pretty valuable in their near-term work to release early next year. So yeah, super thankful for that. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I mean, we are aware of the things that are really important, and sometimes it's taking us a little longer than we want, but we want these changes as much as you guys.
Yep. Cool.
Any other questions?
Nope.
Cool. Well, I have a couple things I can show and things that people need to be aware of, even though they're not on the agenda. I just didn't have a chance.
Yeah, absolutely.
What do you think?
I'm looking at the time, so we've got Fife online as well. They get two things they're going to share.
Yeah.
As well, so if you don't mind, let's switch over to them. I think they have the link, but I do want to reserve time for kind of the and now for one more thing, because I think people will like to see that. But I definitely want to make sure that Fife's covered with search and with offline. So
Absolutely.
Paul and team, you guys online?
Yeah, we're here.
Hey guys.
Hey, how's it going?
Good.
Okay, it looks like we're
Good.
just
So
pulling
let's
it up
switch
now.
over and see how it's going with search and offline.
Okay, sharing my screen now. Okay, so the search had a couple pretty big obstacles. One of them being that all the GraphQL stuff is a post request, which doesn't play that nicely with service workers.
Search or offline?
Oh, offline, sorry, offline. So here we go. Let's just show what this is first. So right now we're casting some requests. Let's just go offline and show you what that looks like. So we are offline now, loading stuff. And then if we go to a page which hasn't been cached, it'll show a little offline thing.
Very cool.
Yeah, so the way it works, I had to, for the URL resolve query, since it's a GraphQL endpoint and it's in Peregrine, we couldn't use this simple cache persist library that just hooks into Apollo. So I'm right now caching them in local storage right now, but there is an open issue in the GraphQL CE repository for changing those to a GET request, so that should be pretty simple to cache with Workbox once that gets changed. And so this is like a kind of like a simple fix here, just putting the URL resolve stuff in local storage. And so since that URL resolve stuff is in local storage, we put in the precache, all of the root components, and then in the resolve unknown roots file, we can load that stuff up and actually load this, and then a simple cache persist will load that up and then make the query. So yeah, that's kind of how it works.
That is awesome.
Yeah, it had to finagle a little bit, but once that GET endpoint or the GraphQL stuff gets switched to GET, it should be very easy to switch that over.
Yeah, and I know that there is an open issue in the GraphQL team to allow requests with GET. So, I mean, Misha can probably speak more to how that's proceeding. But even absent that, I know that it's harder to cache post requests, but when they're GraphQL, potentially we can add some GraphQL awareness to the service worker itself, which is custom code and it's not presently in the backlog. But if you can do that, then some cool things become possible.
I mean, as far as I know, the big one is the URL resolve query we need to actually cache, because that will actually allow us to load up or actually know which pages is what kind of root component, and then load that up. And then if we use the Apollo simple cache persist thing, it's like a really easy just drop in thing, and then it just loads it once we load that page. So yeah.
Awesome.
This is great stuff, guys.
It really is.
And in short order, we just recently greened that, so this is really great.
Mm-hmm.
Cool.
So shall we switch over to search?
Yeah. Okay. Are you on a different URL for?
Yeah, it's on here. Oh, I went offline mode still.
Won't work with that yet. Okay, cool. So I've just got the basic search component. Now if we click this, it'll drop down. That'll change color to indicate that we're actually doing a search. Just throw in backpack or something. And we'll do a GraphQL call. It's on the search is on the product schema. And if we click each item, we go right into the actual item for that. And this will change with the new routing stuff, but right now it'll persist with the same search as before. I'm just using the URL to keep what the query is. We can change how that's all set up. If I go to like duffel or something, it'll just over to a new thing. That's pretty much it.
Outstanding, guys.
If we had video on in Austin, there's a bunch of people high-fiving over here, so.
Yeah. We've all turned into various celebratory emojis.
Yeah, this is cool. So I'm with you. I can definitely see how this might merge with some of the work that Jimmy just showed, right? In terms of like managing the Flickr in the state, and you've got the core there, which I think is great, and kind of seeing this come to life, I think really helps us get to one of the last outstanding experiences for our MVP this month, which is great. We couldn't be more thankful. This is really like with what you've got here, and also see this playing well with potentially even some of the pagination work that you guys have done recently as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Right now, there's a little bit of workaround to get the search component working as far as routing goes. So I'm excited to pull in the routing changes to clean that up a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, that should definitely make your life easier. I'm actually really impressed that you found a workaround, But actually, the funny thing is, it's not such a bad thing to have that kind of stuff in the query anyway. Um, like I think that'll actually be the kind of thing that might be worth keeping, even if you don't need it to make that to make that state persist what you want.
Yeah.
No one that.
So that's great, guys.
If you guys have any feedback on the GraphQL queries or the data that it returns, the search endpoint, feel free to pass that along. We'd be happy to
Yeah, we'll do.
have feedback from you guys.
I
That's
think
great.
the main thing that still remains for us to cover with GraphQL is allowing the filter queries to be specified as real input types, so that we don't have to write a new query for every like type of filter logic that we do. And you already know about that one, right?
A little bit. I haven't dug too far into the back-end GraphQL stuff. Or how
Misha is aware of it. It's like it's an issue that was opened in the GraphQL repo even before we started addressing it. So something you guys are well aware of, that you have to upgrade those filtered input types to real GraphQL inputs, right?
That rings a very vague bell for me, but if you don't mind, if you have the URL handy or a specific issue, I would love to take another look at that to refresh my memory. Because if it's important to you guys, we can probably push it a little higher in the backlog.
Rest assured, yeah, it's something that's being handled, but I think it's non-trivial. It's mostly just, it's mostly just that there is some complex and really powerful logic, but it doesn't really do it in a way that allows us to be efficient, because in order for us to use different branches of that logic, instead of using GraphQL variables, we have to create new GraphQL queries. The issue is 93. I'm sending it to you in Slack.
Awesome. Appreciate it. I'll take another look.
Cool. Good stuff. Any other questions or feedback on this? All right. Well, that sums up at least what was part of the planned agenda. Mr. Zetlin has some sort of, and one more thing to share here as well. So,
well, I hope we're all aware that we now have deployment on every single pull request. Is that something we were aware of? Well, let's show it off. So, let's see. Yeah, we'll go here. Okay, can you guys see my screen and how it is the wrong repository? So we are currently in the midst of acquiring what resources are necessary and like even possible from our cloud and DevOps teams. This is sort of late breaking. I mean, up until fairly recently, we were telling our ops teams and cloud teams with certainty that they don't need to make accommodations, because the PWA that we produce in production mode is effectively the same as a theme and can be deployed as a theme. And as you all know by now, that had to change fairly recently, because we saw sort of the ultimate demise of the project if it remained that complicated, and we added a middle tier. So now we're in hurry up mode with a cloud team and a DevOps team that are doing a great job continuing to progress to 2.3, but they can only spare us so much time, and they've been generous with their time sort of out of band with me trying to figure out cloud environments and deployments. So a couple things you should be aware of. First of all, there is now functionality in the Venia sort of initialization that when you first install or when you first run a build, it's going to check your Magento backend URL and tell you if you don't have one. And then it's going to validate that all of the GraphQL queries present in your project are valid against the schema of the attached project. And if you don't have an attached project, we have env.dist, which has the release version of our maintained cloud environment already hard-coded, and it'll copy that in. So we have an environment validation script, and it lets you know exactly what to do. Now, I can't demo this right now as my personal environment's in a merge state, but rest assured, if you clone a brand new PWA Studio working copy, and then you attempt to run a build or a watch, it's going to be a lot more informative about what you need to do to complete your setup. As you can see, each of these are documented, and they'll display the documentation. So that's nice, and that's all kind of in service of deployment, which, as you may or may not have noticed, is now happening all the time. Jimmy went to Magento venia.now.sh, and wouldn't you know it, it's there. You can even look at it on your phone. But there's also, for instance, I just recently opened a feature request, a pull request about switching to Webpack 4, which is nice and exciting. Let's see if it deployed successfully. For every pull request, the bottom of the pull request, there's a set of checks. GitHub's UI changes sort of on the regular about this, so if it's confusing looking, that's because they're still figuring it out. This says this branch has not been deployed. Ignore that. I don't know why it says that. But if you click Show All Checks, you'll see that the usual stuff is there. You can look at the test results and Circle CI. Looks like we passed. You can look and make sure that the contributor license agreement is signed, and sure enough, I have signed it. And then you can look at the build. Now, when you click on the details next to the now deployment is completed, you're going to get this screen that says it's waiting for instantiation. Now, this is pretty slow, and my excuse for that is that while we're waiting for the cloud team to get us some better CI deploy, I just connected it to my personal account that I've had for a few years for this totally separate cloud aggregation service called Now. It's not part of the Magento infrastructure. It's just something I did so we could have deploys, and it's temporary, but still nice to have. And the initial latency is because it is creating a container, npm installing, building, and then instantiating and staging the project. You can actually see what it's doing if you go to the code base and look in packages, Venia. There is a package JSON that has, whoops, I'm sorry. I actually need to, it's at the root, forgive me. There is a now.json file, and that presence just means that whenever something is merged to root, it gets aliased to Magento Venia, hence the presence of Magento Venia.now.sh, and it's publicly available too. And that actually doesn't mean that the URL is publicly available, because it always is. It means that you get an interesting little peek into the back end if you want to. So if you want to look at the specific code that's been deployed, you can, even on your phone. You can also look at it on the desktop. And this is exactly the backing code that was deployed to that particular thing. So you can see what the build is that's going on over here in this. Oh, look at that, it's ready. And that build is done with scripts prefixed with now. So you can see now build. When it opens up, it's going to create an environment file and then run the build. And then the start is it sets the host to local, so the now internal container will work, and then it runs the staging server. And that's what's connected here. This is my pull request for Webpack 4, which is why vendor and client are so much smaller. And it's going to take some code review, but it sure is different from this deployed instance, because this is currently linked to the current release branch. So for any pull request that you open, yeah, see, a little different. For any pull request that you open, you will find that as soon as it opens, let's take a look, for instance, at implement order confirmation page by RCM Stadigrov, who is waiting for our review on it, that all checks have passed, therefore his pull request is also deployed. And it's, as always, is sort of going to instantiate on demand. So as soon as somebody navigates there, it takes a minute to instantiate. So obviously, at some point, this is going to be replaced with some kind of Magento Cloud or CI. And none of us here in the community that's listening on this demo are DevOps people. It's not our responsibility. We are in progress of retaining those resources while kind of being sensitive to the other priorities that exist for Magento 2.3. But in the meantime, this is an enabler. And when they can provide us with something, then we'll get something a little bit faster, and it's something a little bit less mysterious and attached to my personal credit card, which, don't worry, it doesn't cost a lot. So what we're gonna wait for here again is that npm install and then build and everything that we were talking about. And this is a totally different branch. And now it's loading. And if his pull request is in effect here, then we should be able to, we got a data fetch error. So it looks like that is a case where he has older code and his small image has a subselection. So the deploy probably shouldn't have worked because that should have canceled on him. But when you have that kind of GraphQL mismatch, it should show you before you deploy because of the new script setup. So anyway, long story short, you now can issue a pull request and then get a copy of your code deployed into the cloud where you can view it, you can link somebody else to it, and you can look at it on the phone. Hopefully that will enable us a great deal. That's it.
Very nice. Now, if you hear the developers on the phone, they're all high-fiving each other now as well.
Yes, they've all turned into emoji as well.
Awesome stuff. No, I think the big part of what we're trying to do, I mean, for those, again, there's been a lot of chatter outside of this. I think the idea of getting people up and running with this as quickly as possible using these cloud instances has been super helpful, especially for traditional front-end developers. And so I myself have played around with it. It's super easy to do. So kudos on that one. I think it doesn't get as much play, I think, as the rest, but I know that it's really helping us get to where we need to be. So thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Cool. All right. Any other questions, comments before we wrap it up for this week? Okay. Well, this concludes the demo. Thank you so much, everybody. Have a great rest of your day, or rest of your evening, and we'll talk soon.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.